Good afternoon. My name's Becca Legg and I'm really proud to be the director of Restored, a Christian organisation speaking up about violence against women and equipping the church to stand with survivors and against abuse. If you've stumbled across us this lunchtime, do visit our website later to find out more about what we do. You can find us at restored-uk.org. But it's been quite a week. It's Monday, but it feels like it's been quite a week already, hasn't it? It seems so much more than a week since we were celebrating International Women's Day. So much has happened in between. The story of the abduction and murder of Sarah Everard has filled our screens and has in some way created a wave of discontent amongst women who are tired of not feeling safe, tired of not being able to walk home in the dark and moderating their behaviour in order to be safe. And 2 reports were released this week, one from the World Health Organization, affirming what we already knew in some respects, that 1 in 4 women will suffer physical or sexual abuse from their husbands or their boyfriends at some point in their life. And another from the UN UK saying that 97% of 16 to 24-year-old girls and women will be sexually harassed. Will be, not might be, but will be. What happened to Sarah Everard is rare. But violence against women, sadly, really isn't. The streets aren't safe, and neither, it turns out, are our homes. Now, I was fascinated this week watching Twitter as the trending hashtag went from Sarah Everard to very quickly the very defensive, not all men, and then it changed overnight and became too many men. And I've watched as the conversation has moved on, and I've been really delighted to see some of my male friends and counterparts begin to speak up, to begin to ask this question of, well, what can we do? What can I do? How can we make a difference? It's been a painful week, highlighted by all that has happened over the weekend. But I believe that there's real hope amongst the horror. Conversations are beginning to happen about how the church as a whole can respond to the situation. And it's exciting to see men asking how they can get involved in changing the world around them, how they can support organisations like ours who are already working to end violence against women. But organisations too, like Open Doors, because today it's my very great privilege to introduce you to Henrietta Blyth, who's the CEO of Open Doors UK. Open Doors is perhaps best known, or certainly it's what I knew them for as I was growing up, for smuggling Bibles into closed countries and supporting Christians facing religious persecution. And we'll talk a little bit about all of that. But I really want to talk to Henrietta about her journey to where she is, but also about the work that Open Doors does to work specifically with women. And what does it mean to be a woman who's living in a country where actually her faith isn't okay, but actually her gender makes life difficult too? What happens when faith and religious persecution and gender intersect? So before I just keep talking and forget to actually talk to Henrietta, Henrietta, welcome. It's lovely to have you with us.
It's really lovely to be with you, Becca. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm beginning to really enjoy doing these. I feel like I'm getting to talk to my friends and just allow other people in on the conversation and get to know you a little bit. It's lovely. But just to get, so people can get to know you if they haven't met you before, it'd be great just to share some of the simple things about who you are, and then we'll get into some of the grittier bits at the end. So Henrietta, would you tell us a little bit about, where you grew up and what that looked like for you?
Okay. So I grew up in the UK, but I also spent 3 years living in the States when I was little. So my younger sister was born in the States, which is interesting because it means I started school in the States. And when I came back to the UK, this was in the 60s, mm-hmm. They considered the education system in the States to be less advanced, let's put it like that, than in the UK. So they put me back a year. So all the way through school, I ended up being one of the oldest in my year because they'd put me back, which, just interesting, isn't it? And then, I was brought up in Guildford, so Surrey girl, and sent off to boarding school quite young, aged 9, and had 2 wonderful, wonderful Christian house mistresses at school, one of whom became Ellie Mumford, so married John and set up the Vineyard in the UK. So they had a massive influence on me. So that was my sort of early years and upbringing, and then university in Bristol.
Gosh. Do you know what? That was really interesting. I didn't know that about, you've been to boarding school, but I didn't know that about your house mistress. I used to work in a boarding school in Kenya actually years ago, but I always felt like it was this incredible privilege to be raising the girls that were in the house where, you know, that I only did one evening a week looking after them, but it felt like this enormous privilege to have influence, that kind of influence over their lives. It's incredible, isn't it?
Amazing. I think it's a really amazing thing, the influence of teachers. Years later, I was at New Wine and I went to the loo at New Wine, as one does. And in there was a lady, a woman that I know as Diana Lang. That was her maiden name. She was a drama teacher at the school. And I went, oh, Miss Lang. And she turned around, she went, oh, Henny. She recognized me and everything. I mean, it's incredible. This was about 25 years on. Anyway, we got chatting and she said to me, we prayed for you all. She said there was a group of Christian teachers in the school in that time who prayed for us so much. I spent most of the 70s there. I was there for 8 years. And it was amazing 25 years later to hear that they'd done that and see the fruit of that prayer in my own life was just really, it's extraordinary, the people the Lord puts in your life at a young age and the influence they have. So yeah, massive, actually.
It's incredible. Do you know what? That's just a really good opportunity to do a big shout out to teachers. I used to be a teacher, and a big shout out to teachers who have had we've all had a rough year, but they've had a really rough year.
They've had a really, yeah, we salute you. Yeah, we totally salute you. Yeah.
Absolutely, we really do. And but you know, there's people in your life, isn't it, who influence you like that, which actually brings me on to another question very beautifully. So we've invited you here because we're meeting women who inspire us. So that's you, Henrietta. But I wonder which women have inspired you kind of in your journey through life. Could be at any point. Who have they been?
Yeah, it's a great question. I worked in hospices for a while. And one of the people I met was Dame Cicely Saunders, who was responsible for setting up the hospice movement in the UK right from the get-go. And she was just the most extraordinary woman. She was quite old by the time I worked with her, but she trained herself. She was sort of one-person multi-professional team. So she trained as a nurse and a doctor, and I think she also trained as a social worker. So just incredible. But in the hospice where I worked, she'd stepped down as the leader of the hospice, but she was still around. And people used to use her, like, I'd say, I want to have a go at this. And people would say, oh, Cicely will never agree to you doing that and everything. So I would go and talk to her in her office and I'd say, you know, Dame Cicely, I'm thinking about doing this, what do you think? And she was just the most extraordinary, inspirational woman. But she was one of these women who she had a strong faith, but also she had a vision. She had a really powerful vision and she just was relentless, absolutely relentless in going after it. All the education, all the passion that she poured into it. And, you know, she could be quite tricky sometimes, but then I think people with a vision often are quite tricky, to be honest, quite difficult to live with, but she wasn't afraid to change her mind. So if you had a good idea, she'd come with you and say, yeah, let's try it. Why not? I remember her talking to me about one woman had been in the hospice who'd had breast cancer, and apparently she had these really awful wounds on her chest. And they discovered that Manuka honey was an amazing healing balm for this wound. And she talked about how they discovered that and how they'd introduced it and everything. It was really exciting to meet somebody towards the end of their life, having worked all their lives around this passion, who was still willing to try new things, learn new things, innovate and so on. So she would be a big one for me.
Oh, she sounds amazing. And it's always, isn't it? It's always such a privilege when you get to meet people like that and go, gosh, they've been part of my life and I can learn from you. It's, you know, I can think of so many women in my life who've been amazing. And here's a more frivolous question. So if there were to be a film made about your life, who would you like to play you?
Oh, well, my husband would say Kate Blanchett, because on a good day, he says I look like Kate Blanchett, which is probably one of the best compliments he has ever paid me, to be honest. So I'm like, okay, I'll go with that. I will go with that.
Take it and we'll run with it. And
absolutely, take it when you can get it. That's my view.
And nobody would ever know the difference. So I want to ask in a minute about, open doors and what has, well, I guess what made you want to go for the job there? What is it about open doors that set you, that caught your attention and made you want to step up and lead this great organization?
So, well, I first got interested in sort of social justice and the international world because I was very involved with the Iona community. In my year between school and university, I worked up there, and I was very captivated by their passion for social justice and for the Lord and everything, and for the real meaning of the gospel, that the local church can take the message of the gospel and the DNA of Jesus with his spirit and bring the culture of God into our world here and now. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So that really captured me back then. And then I heard Jim Wallace, who set up the Sojourners in the States, speaking at Corrymeela, a community in Northern Ireland. And he said, if you want to know what Jesus meant by blessed are the poor, go and live with them. And I went out to live in Kathmandu for a couple of years as a volunteer. And that was when I really began to understand that the gospel and the power of the Holy Spirit is designed to change the world we live in now. It's not all just sort of pie in the sky for when we die. It actually is about here and now and changing the world. And I found that so totally exciting. So ever since then, really, I've been passionate about the local church, changing communities, changing people's lives. And so I worked in relief and development for many years. So Christian Aid, Tear Fund, which we both know well, and everything. And then I went to work as CEO of an organization called InterHealth Worldwide that had been set up to provide health and psychosocial care, psychological health care for missionaries and relief and development workers. And so I was CEO there for a few years, 2 years or so, and sadly we went bust. So we ran out of cash and the organization had to go into liquidation. And that was really, really bruising for me as a leader. It was really difficult to lead the organization through that. Very, very painful to particularly to have to tell the founder that actually we were going to have to close. And also just really hard not to know how to save it. We ended up with a sort of perfect storm that meant we just ran out of cash. And once you can't pay the people you owe money to, you have to go into liquidation. You have no choice by law. So it's really difficult. So I then took a few months out and sort of licked my wounds, if I'm honest, and just tried to process it with the Lord. And there were these headhunters, good friends, Christians, who I'd worked with over quite a few years, actually. And they kept ringing me up and saying, come on, Henrietta, you're a leader. We believe in you. Don't give up. What about this job? What about this job? And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And they even got an old friend, George Carey, bless him, to ring me to encourage me to go for one of the jobs. And George is so lovely. I was like, George, no, I don't think it's right for me and everything. Anyway, this went on for a few months. And then finally, just before Christmas, they rang. And they said, look, there's a job going for CEO of Open Doors. And we really, really, really think you should think about this. And we think this may be the job the Lord has for you. And, it was just before Christmas. They said, pray about it over Christmas and then let us know. And it just so happened that I'd done a seminar with my predecessor at Open Doors a year or so earlier, 2 CEOs in conversation. And we prayed about it. We weren't sure, but we prayed about it. We thought, well, let's go through the process. It's me and my husband, see what we think. And then after Christmas, Lisa, my predecessor, rang me to ask me to go on the board for Open Doors International. And I said, oh, well, it's funny that you're asking me that because actually I'm thinking about going for your job, because she was leaving it. And she went, oh, forget about ODI, definitely go for Open Doors, definitely go for CEO of Open Doors. So that's how I ended up here. And of course, the heart of Open Doors is to strengthen the local church in all the countries where it faces persecution and discrimination. So it's right at the heart of my personal vision. And so that's how I ended up here, Becca.
That's quite a story. And it's, you know, thank you as well for your honesty in telling us about this, the tough stuff, because it's so easy sometimes to look at somebody and go, but they look fabulous and they've got this fabulous job and they've just been brilliant. And George Carey got on the phone to ask them to do a job, and good grief, what a life they lead. How amazing. But actually, it's really important to hear the tough bits in the middle and about the things that, you know, I don't even like using the word, but the failures in the middle of that as well.
Exactly.
It isn't all roses. I mean, what other challenges have you faced? Because I think for anyone listening in, you are, like, you inspire me. You are inspiring, but it's so much more helpful sometimes. I was just reading a book this week about, you know, integrity, and the fact that actually when we're honest about what we struggle with, and actually we're able to help people so much more and kind of share the power that we have with them as well. And I just wonder what other struggles there were along the way to where you are now.
Yeah, so this is confession time. I didn't actually line manage anybody until my early 40s. So, and I'd been working all that time. So I used to have a manager. He said to me, Henrietta, I just don't understand. Why aren't you prepared to manage a team? You know, I always had those jobs that were sort of like internal consultancy roles, like quality assurance facilitator and this sort of thing. But I just wasn't prepared to do it. And the reason I wasn't prepared to do it was because I thought I'd be no good at it, and I didn't want to fail in front of people. And I've thought a lot about why I thought that. And actually, it goes back to the boarding school thing. So there were 2 occasions at boarding school that I remember really well. One was probably about 11, and I was head of my house, and we came last in a carol singing competition. You know, these, on the face of it, these things are so minor,
but they're traumatic. Yeah.
Anyway, we came last, and the judge really, he probably didn't realize, but he just panned us. He really panned us about how our pronunciation was awful and we'd sung flat and blah, blah, blah. And I just thought, oh, well, I'm head of the house, you know, obviously I can't lead. So that was one. And then there was another occasion when we had these dormitories, and I was head of the dormy, as we called it. And to be honest, I'd been really bullying one of the girls on the dormy. And finally she rounded on me and she said, why are you picking on me? Why are you always picking on me? Leave me alone. Why are you doing this? Anyway, I was so ashamed because it was true. I could see it was true. I was so ashamed. And I thought, right, I'm never going to be in this position again. And when I reflect on it now, 3 things, I think. Shame and fear are so paralyzing. And when you've been shamed, when you feel ashamed, it is so difficult to get over it. And particularly if you've been shamed at a young age, I think you really need people who redress the balance and everything. And of course, after I'd failed at Intel, it was so healing for me that those headhunters kept saying to me, you can do it, you can do it. You know, we need mentors, don't we? We need people who encourage us and keep us going. But the other thing that I think is interesting is the fear thing. So, and you and I have talked about this actually, Becca, about being people pleasers.
Yeah.
And so for years, Brene Brown actually is really interesting. Her book, Gifts of Imperfection, total recommendation for anyone who resonates with this. But she talks about how if you're by nature people pleasing, then if you're going to do something and you don't think you're going to do it very well, you are so afraid of the way people react to you when you don't do it very well that you don't do it at all. So in fact, you put your whole life on hold. You just paralyze yourself. And that's definitely what happened to me. So finally, what happened was one Christmas, we were at my parents' house, and my father's best friend said to me, you know, you could lead an organization, you know, you could, but nobody's ever going to give you a chance unless you've managed people. You have to prove that you can manage a team. And, you know, I thought, I was sort of mid-career at that point. I thought, this is actually a bit ridiculous. I need to at least have a go. So anyway, I went off and did an MBA for a year. And after the MBA, I came back to London, and I actually went back into the NHS where I'd been working before. And I ended up, I had something like 250 people in my division. It was extraordinary.
That's quite a jump. Yeah.
Yeah, it's first job managing people. So I mean, I feel quite sorry for the people I learned on, because I was pretty bad at it. But I do, looking back on it now, I mean, it seems, well, it is several decades ago now, but that shame as a young person really paralyzed me, actually. And I didn't talk about it to anyone. So because I didn't process it, it just sat with me. And I think I made promises to myself about never putting myself in that position again. So, yeah.
Gosh.
Wow, it's hard, isn't it?
It is. And we've all got those things, haven't we? That it might just have been somebody as a throwaway comment when we were 13 said, and yet they sit and they're the voice in the back of our head. And sometimes we don't even realize that that's what's driving our behavior or our fears or anything. And getting to the bottom of that, I'm very glad you did. I'm very glad you got to the bottom of it.
Well, so am I. But it's also interesting that it took me so long to deal with it. So, you know, that's years we're talking about.
But it shows too that it can be done, and it's never too late. It can turn around. And I was thinking as well, as you were talking about, you know, our need for mentors, it almost goes beyond mentors, because what those headhunters have done is they've been your champions, haven't they? They've championed you. And you know, and some of us say and think, oh, I wouldn't mind one of those. It would be lovely. But actually it's about us too, isn't it? It's about us saying, well, how can we be champions for those around us? How can we, you know, now that we have a little bit of influence, or, you know, we've got perhaps a bigger network, what can we do to be championing others around us, men, women, you know, but be helping to lift them up and be their support. Really important. But look, I did also want to talk to you about open doors, because I could talk to you about just all this interesting stuff forever. But I know that you've just published a report, and I think you do every year, looking specifically at the very real differences that women and men experience when it comes to religious persecution. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about that. Tell us about the report for starters. I'm pretty sure we're putting it on Facebook as we speak, so people can link and find it.
Yeah. So one of the big things that Open Doors does is raise awareness about persecution and discrimination. And the shocking truth is there are 340 million of our Christian brothers and sisters, that's 5 times population of the UK, who are experiencing unprecedented levels of persecution and discrimination on account of their faith. Now, when I joined Open Doors, I was so shocked at how little we knew about it in the church in the UK and Ireland. So we've been doing research into what's happening for coming up for 30 years now. But in 2018, we decided to look at the persecution and discrimination through a gender lens to see, is persecution gender blind, or is it in fact gender specific? And so for the last 3 years, we've been sort of doing a deep dive into the large body of data to see whether men and women are experiencing persecution differently. And they are. And the truth is that women experience twice as many pressure points as men. So we talk about the double vulnerability of women, that women are vulnerable because of both their faith and also because of their gender. And the characteristics of the way they're persecuted are quite different. So for men, the persecution tends to be severe and focused, and also quite visible. Like a lot of it happens out in, you know, if a man is beaten up, people will see it. It's on the street or whatever. And the main methods used against men are around physical violence, around employment. So persecutors go for the areas where the church is most vulnerable. And one of those is about our status in society. And for men, it's often about being the provider for the family. So removing their means to make a living is huge. And also they're often imprisoned by governments. So that's what tends to be happening with men. With women, however, the persecution tends to be hidden, and it's violent and it's complex. So with women, the three main pressure points are forced marriage, sexual violence, and physical violence. Now, shall I tell you a story to give you an example of what this looks like?
That would help, yeah.
So it's interesting, actually, because this sort of persecution creates a huge amount of shame and fear within the community. So when women are shamed in this way, the repercussions are massive. So often women are persecuted to get at their menfolk. So this is a story about Lucina, who at the beginning of last year was 19 and she was studying to be a doctor. She lives in South Asia in a predominantly Muslim country. And 9 a.m. one morning, she's walking back from a tutoring session when another girl her age comes up alongside her and starts asking her what she's been up to, who her tutor is, could they study together and everything. And Lucina's father was Boutros, was a very gifted Christian evangelist. So persecutors had a go at attacking him, but he was still evangelizing. So at this point, they're turning their attention onto his daughter. So this girl comes up alongside her, says, would Lucina like a study partner? Lucina thinks, oh, that would be fun. And then the girl says, well, look, I've booked a cab and we're going in the same direction as you. So why don't we give you a lift? So Lucina gets into this taxi and discovers three men already in the taxi, one of whom is this girl, Gadara's brother. Anyway, they give her tea and cakes, so she sort of feels more relaxed and, off they go. Next thing that happens, Lucina wakes up clearly several hours later in an unknown bedroom, realizes she's been drugged and starts screaming for help. And the girl, Gadara, unlocks the bedroom door and says, stop screaming, you're never going home. You're married to my brother now.
Wow.
Slams the door closed, locks it. Lucina's left. Anyway, she was forcibly raped by her so-called husband every day. And her family, of course, were desperately looking for her, but couldn't find her. A few weeks later, the country went into lockdown, so nobody could get her. And Lucina was forced to be a maid, do housework for the family and everything. The sexual violence continued. Eventually, when lockdown came to an end, the family went out and Lucina had the guts to creep out of her room, find a mobile phone and call her sister and give her the address. And Boutros, her dad, and her brother went to the police station. The police didn't believe them. But finally they searched and they found Lucina, brought her home. They also went back and arrested her so-called husband, and he's subsequently been charged for rape and jailed. But for Lucina, the shame of that, she found out she was pregnant at the end of last year. She gave birth to a son. The family, the persecution has increased. Boutros is still evangelizing, but it's incredibly difficult for them. Sadly, that story is both tragic and typical of what is happening to our Christian sisters. And of course, the shame is intended not just for the daughter, but for the father as well, to force him to stop.
It's hard to have words to even respond to a situation.
No, it's just so tragic. Can you imagine at 19? And of course, the presence of this little boy, I mean, any child is a gift from the Lord, aren't they? But I mean, so hard, the living evidence on a daily basis of what's happened to you. Really heartbreaking stuff.
And the whole family affected. And just something else. And fascinating as well to hear that lockdown has exacerbated an extra level of pressure and difficulty in the midst of all of that. We're so aware of that in our country, aren't we? But I think it's easy to forget the impact that's having around the world in other situations. Are there other ways that, lockdowns created stresses and pressures that you're aware of within what you're doing?
Well, I mean, it's basically lockdown has put another weapon into the hands of persecutors. So, for many women, as in this country, they've been forced to stay at home with the very people who abuse them for their gender and for their faith. We also know many Christians are living in poverty, and we know that many of them are daily wage earners. So one of the effects of lockdown was they couldn't go out to earn any money, facing starvation within days. And then even if the government distributed food, Christians were turned away empty-handed because they're Christians. And Open Doors helped, I don't know, about 150,000 Christians through our partners in India, and 80% of them said they'd experienced this discrimination in the distribution of food. So, you know, it's been really desperate. We also know in places like Nigeria, where Islamic extremists like Boko Haram are attacking Christian villages, destroying churches, killing pastors, the security forces and the police were busy enforcing lockdowns and looking in the opposite direction. So the attacks increased with impunity, and we've seen the violence in Nigeria has just surged. On average, 10 Christians in northern Nigeria in the Middle Belt are slaughtered every day for their faith. So just extraordinary. And we know that the gender-based violence against Christian women is massive in northern Nigeria and the Middle Belt as well.
And we've seen that in stories which hit the headlines occasionally, although mostly they don't, do they? But they're a few years ago when we heard about the school where all the girls had been rounded up and taken up. But that is going on again and again and again, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And we've just had the 3rd anniversary of the abduction of Leah Sharibu, who was just a teenager, still is just a teenager. She was taken with 100 other girls from her school, and the other girls were released. Leah was the only one who was kept by Boko Haram because she refused to renounce her faith in Jesus. And there are all sorts of rumors about what's happened to her. The truth is, we just don't know. But at the beginning of last year, I had the privilege of meeting her mother, Rebecca. And honestly, Becca, the pain and sorrow and suffering on that woman's face, I just thought, how do you live with this? And I said to her, do you know what's happened to Leah? And she said, every day we hear different rumors, but we don't know what's true. Gosh. And the president of Nigeria apparently personally gave Rebecca a guarantee that he would get Leah released, but it hasn't happened. So, yeah, I'm so inspired by her faith and her determination to hang on to Jesus. But the consequences of that are just desperate for her and for her family. That's really heartbreaking stuff.
It really is. And I mean, in a minute, I'm gonna, I'm gonna just say for anyone who's listening in to put any questions that you have in the chat, and I'll ask Henrietta. But everything in me, it's a little bit like I've seen, across Twitter and social media, people just saying, but what can we do? What can we do? And that's about what we've seen in the UK just over the last week. But listening to the stories, realizing just how many people are going through such unspeakable and unbearable. I've got teenage daughters, and I cannot begin to imagine what it must feel like to have your daughter taken. It makes me feel physically sick and cold all at the same time, and it's just my imagination. And what can we do? How can we support the work that you do? What can we do to support Christians around the world who are facing such terrible times and being so phenomenally brave? What can we do?
So there's a lot we can do to help them in the situation in which they find themselves. So a lot of what we do is practical support. So food, like I mentioned, during COVID, so the church doesn't starve to death. We can also, where people have lost jobs and lost livelihoods, we can help them set up new businesses, we can train people, we can give them the equipment to earn money, and so on. We do a lot of that for widows in particular whose husbands have been killed because of their faith. We can strengthen church leaders, we still smuggle Bibles, we can provide discipleship for new Christians. There's a lot of practical stuff we can do. And of course, we can also pray, which is probably, given that this is predominantly a spiritual battle, that's probably the most important thing we can do. I think the other thing we can do is speak out on their behalf, and we have a campaign ongoing at the moment.
Okay.
We are asking our supporters to write to their MPs, all on our website, opendoorsuk.org, write to their MPs to get them to sign a petition for Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, and Liz Truss, the Minister for Women and Equalities, to do three things. What we want is, the government's been doing a lot around gender-based violence and sexual violence, but we want them to recognise that faith makes women additionally vulnerable. It's this double vulnerability we want them to recognise. We also want them to see that trauma counselling and support is needed to help these women reintegrate with their communities. And we know that people can regain their lives. We want to see people restored, don't we? We want to see these women knowing that they're seen, that they're heard, that they're helped to achieve their God-given potential. We know that the power of the cross heals. So we want these women to experience this. And we also want to know that the Prime Minister's special envoys for freedom of religion or belief, Fiona Bruce, and his special envoy around girls' education are properly resourced so they can make a difference. So you and I were talking earlier about how education is needed, how the church can model different ways of doing these things, how we need different understanding of what's okay for the way men and women relate. And we think there's a lot the government can do to resource these envoys to make sure these things happen. So that's our current campaign. It's all on the website. And, you know, these women, our sisters, may feel that they don't have a voice themselves, but we can really speak out on their behalf. So that's a very practical thing people can do right now.
Brilliant. And we will make sure that we get links to that up on our Facebook page to follow on from this as we carry on, because you know, it's very easy, isn't it, to be horrified and to say, gosh, something's terrible, but actually doing something is really important, isn't it? It's really, really,
it really is. It really is. And one of the things that blesses me when I travel, obviously I haven't traveled for months, but you know, when I travel, what really blesses me is how blown away Christians are in some of these countries on our World Watch List when they hear that in the UK and Ireland, we're praying for them, that we know what's going on with them, that we're standing with them, that we're supporting them, that they're speaking out. This thing about knowing you're not alone, that is huge. That's massive. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much that actually resonates with what we do. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not alone. Somebody understands, somebody gets it, somebody's walked this road before me, or somebody may never have walked it, but they'll walk with me. And that means everything, doesn't it? It's so important. Oh, look, we've got some questions coming in.
Okay.
So somebody's asked, is there a country that Open Doors cannot get into to help at the moment?
Well, that's really great question. And so what happened as a result of COVID was that particularly totalitarian states closed their borders. So North Korea, which is the most dangerous place for Christians and has been for the last 20 years. So it's number one on our World Watch List. At the beginning of the whole COVID thing, they closed their borders. It was always difficult to get out of North Korea, but they closed their borders to anyone needing to get in. So that's been really difficult. And we don't know much about what's happening in North Korea. We know there are 60 to 70,000 Christians held in internment camps there. Forced re-education, forced labour, starvation is grim. We think there are about 300 to 400,000 Christians in the country. We don't know how COVID has affected them. And we do, you know, our partners and churches do smuggle in supplies and Bibles and so on, but it's been very, very difficult since COVID started. China as well have increased their surveillance of Christians, pastors, churches, and so on. You know, last year we warned they were introducing facial recognition technology into churches and creating this social credit score that we are worried will be used against Christians and so on. So COVID has enabled a lot of countries to tighten their control on the church.
Fascinating and terrible all at the same all at the same time. Now, somebody here said, hearing real life stories does make praying easier. I believe God will give us the strength to cope if we ever find ourselves in that position, but it does scare me that it could happen here in the future. Do you have examples? Do you have stories to encourage us?
Yes, I do. I have two stories that I've personally found really encouraging. One is about what's been happening in Sudan. So Sudan is a country that loads of us have prayed for years and years and years. And, you know, there were the troubles in Darfur and everything, and the church there was very, very oppressed. When Bashir was overthrown and the new government came in, they actually changed the constitution. So they removed the death penalty for apostasy, so you're no longer killed if you convert. They've changed some of the religious regulations, and it really looks like things are improving there for Christians, and that is a massive encouragement and just a real answer to prayer for those of us who have that country on our hearts. The other thing that I found really encouraging is how Christians witness in the most difficult situations by reaching out to non-believers in their communities. So in Iraq, for example, and Syria, many pastors remained behind even when they had the chance to leave, so that they could continue to minister not just to members of their churches, but to everyone in need in the community. And we heard a lovely story from Sri Lanka during COVID. So there was a church in northeast Sri Lanka that had been really badly persecuted by its Hindu neighbours. And in fact, one family in the church had been really badly beaten summer before last by Hindu neighbours. And then a few months later, COVID struck. And the pastor of this church realized there were many poor people in their community, not just Christians. And so when Open Doors partners offered to supply the church with food, he said, would you give us enough food for the wider community as well? And so our partners were able to do that. And as a result, the pastor and the church have fed 100 families outside the church, as well as church members, including, get this, the family of the Hindu neighbors who'd beaten them up. And the results have been phenomenal. I mean, the pastor said to us that whole atmosphere in the community has completely changed. Even apparently the local governor is now looking more favorably on the church and everything. People are expressing an interest. So that whole thing about being salt and light in dark and difficult situations, that's just massive. And it's such a huge encouragement. Like, even when your neighbors really give you a hard time and are physically abusive, you can still choose to love them. And yeah, we hear lots of stories like that actually, and they're just a massive inspiration.
That's such a beautiful story. You know, I spent time in very different, and it's not even about religious persecution, it was more, you know, racial and tribal, but I spent time in Rwanda and was always so blown away by the stories of people who were able to come back and reconcile and create new relationships where previously it had been so terrible. And it's just extraordinary what God. But I remember asking somebody over there once, I said, you know, how is it possible for this country to have come back from, you know, of genocide? Like, how do you come back? And this lady was incredible, and she just said, it takes two things, Rebecca. And I said, what's that? And she said, it takes an awful lot of hard work, and it's not possible without the grace of God. And it's just the truth. You know, it's stuck with me. A lot of hard work, it's not possible without the grace of God. And it's those two things, because it's God who can transform everything, isn't it? But if those church leaders, if those families weren't prepared to put the hard work in and go, no, we want to feed this family, we want to feed our community, it doesn't happen. It takes both, doesn't it? It's incredible.
It really, really does.
Oh, do you know, I've loved talking to you. Thank you so very, very much. Before I go, how can we, is anybody listening in, how can we pray for you, and how can we pray for Open Doors?
I think through COVID and lockdown, the Lord has been refining the church.
Yeah.
And I think it's been hard. All of us would say it's been really hard. But I think the Lord's going to do a new thing. And I want to be ready for it. I want to be part of it. And I want to see the church just being such a force for good and a light, really, as we come out of these dark times. So that's my prayer, really, that wherever we are around the world, whatever we've been going through, the Lord will use us and inspire us and deepen our faith and grow our relationship with him, draw us close to him again. I really hope he will put a hunger in our hearts to know him more, that will push us towards him. You know that thing about draw near to God and he will draw near to you, that we'll just want to be near, that will immerse ourselves in his word, that he'll draw near to us, that he'll do amazing things. This has just been unprecedented, this weird season, hasn't it? Nobody's ever seen anything like this before. And I just think God's doing something amazing, and we want to be part of it. So yeah, the specific prayers for Open Doors and for the people we're serving are all on the website, if I can get that a plug. And the prayer diary is really good and really specific, and loads of stories in there of encouragement as well as need. So
yeah. No, I used to work for a church, and the prayer diary is awesome. We used to work with it all the time. It's such a great resource and so helpful to be able to shape our prayers. And really, you've done hard work of finding out all the information we need, and it just enables us to join in. So Henrietta, I just want to say thank you. You have, you are a woman who inspires me, but you've inspired all of us this afternoon, and it's just been fabulous talking to you. So I'm going to say goodbye to everyone who's listening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's been really great just to talk and chew the fat, and thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you.